Hi, I'm Steve Robbins, and thank you for joining me. And I am here today with Greg Stern from go.groundupphysio.com. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
So, Greg and I met at a business networking event, and one of the things that has been a constant issue for me, especially during the last several years when all work has been done remotely, has been the amount of time that I spend sitting at my desk. Now, I have fabulous Zoom background, so I can fool my mind into believing that I'm getting lots of activity, but I can't fool my belt into thinking that, and I've had to buy new shirts. So, one of the things that Greg and I got talking about was movement and bodies and how those relate to well-being, etc. And he has some interesting ideas, and he has a different take than a lot of people do on where we should be paying attention and what we should be doing. So, Greg, I just want to start by just asking kind of broadly, what is Ground Up Physio, and why did you start it? What's your mission?
Yeah,
What's driving it
absolutely.
all?
The full name of the company is From the Ground Up Physiotherapy. So I'm a
Okay.
physical therapist in Montreal, Canada. And this all started actually from my own personal injury. So 10 years ago, I was playing flag football and had an innocent ankle sprain that never heals properly. And unfortunately, that led to a lot of chronic pain for many years and a long journey and pursuit of trying to heal my own issues. So I took the traditional route of going to physical therapy myself, tried one, tried two, tried three, tried different people, and was following to a T exactly what they were doing. They did lots of hands-on therapy to me. They were like, really focusing on trying to get my ankle better and doing all the bandage drills and the calf stretching, all the traditional things that people are given. But unfortunately, nothing was really working. And, fast forward a few years, I ended up getting surgery on my ankle. And I woke up thinking like, all my problems would be over. But then a couple weeks passed by and I'm starting to put more weight on my foot again. And now I have new hip pain and back pain that hadn't been there. And, I'm 30 now. So this is 10 years ago. So the age of 20, I feel broken, unbalanced, and in constant pain. And I'm kind of at this very low point where I'm pretty depressed. I used to be a super active guy and now I can't really do anything. And everything would just set me back. And I really knew that I needed to take a deep dive in order to understand what was going on because the solutions that were being offered to me weren't really holistic in nature. They were kind of site of pain equals site of problem. And that's a lot of the way that physical therapy works today. You kind of go and you show up to someone's office and the kind of expectation is that I'm going to lie on a table and someone's there to fix me. And unfortunately, that doesn't really work. It sounds nice in nature to get like rub out an area and, they do heat pads and the electrodes. And if you've ever had the experience, if not, it's kind of very isolated in nature and it wasn't working for me. And I knew I needed to take a ground up approach. How do all the parts fit together? How does a foot speak to the knee, to the hip? We've always heard these funny songs, the foot bone's connected to the shin bone. But unfortunately,
And it is. It
it
is.
is 100%. But the way that the approaches that were offered to me from multiple different professionals, where everything is this like kind of tunnel focus vision. So, fast forward many years later, learning from many different mentors from around the world, really just being this resourceful guy that's, the cool thing about physical therapy is like, does it work or not? Like, so I'm trying these things on myself. I actually switched career paths. I was thinking of going to medicine. I was always interested in the sciences, but probably more the biochemical sciences. And now I wanted to like know everything about biomechanics, understanding how the body works. And, now I couldn't stand barefoot for more than 10 seconds without pain. I was reliant on orthotics. And if I wasn't on orthotics, I was dying. Now I go on hikes barefoot. I slack line, which means like, I don't know if you ever know what slack lining is, but basically setting up like a little 2-inch thing between two trees that's dangling between like a circus man. And I walk between them and I do lots of interesting things to my body, but all came from an understanding of like, all right, I need to take ownership in my body. I need to be active in this process. And I really need to understand how the parts work together. And now I own a clinic and help people that have been dealing with issues that have failed traditional approaches get back to doing the things they love. So that's kind of my long story put in a couple of minutes.
Cool. So my brain is stuck on the slacklining thing. I had for some reason thought that slacklining was when you hold a wheel above and you're like, no, when you walk across. I'm like, oh. And now I'm suddenly like, okay, and this probably is already a tangent, right? Because I don't want to have to talk about. Let's
Let's
get to
tangent
the
it
main
up.
topic.
All
But I'm
for
like, how do you
tangent.
balance? Like, I
Yeah,
have
yeah,
enough
it's
trouble
all
balancing on
about
the floor.
the interesting thing about slacklining. So just think about your body. Like if you're gonna cover food, right? You want to take out all the air, right?
Yep.
So when I'm doing slacklining, it's like almost like taking a full exhale to like remove the air in my system almost to create tension because you want tension in the right areas, and then you want to be well, obviously your hands are out and they kind of you're just dancing with your fingers almost to push the air slightly to learn how to organize your center mass perfectly over your base of support while this thing is moving. But it takes a long time to learn, and but I've taught people, so like it's not this impossible skill, but it's a pure demonstration of how can we stack our head over our heart over our hips over our feet in perfect balance. A lot of people, when I ask them to like bend one knee and like go into like a runner's pose, what happens is they bend their knee and their ribs go backwards, so they end up leaning into the lower back, and hence why so many people are struggling with low back pain. So it's just a real challenge to the nervous system, and a stacking of pure verticality and then dancing to move through space. So it's a very fun meditative flow practice that I've learned to do over time. And again, I'm not special, it's just a matter of
You
practice,
just learn,
like
right?
just learning. Yeah.
There's a Burning Man, a regional Burning Man event that I go to, which has a camp called "Don't Screw Up," and
Yeah.
they have things like slack lines, and they have ladders up to tall trees, and you have to crawl along
Yeah.
things. And it's a Burning Man event, which means there's no safety team there. And one year I was staffing the medical tent, and there was this steady stream of people who had twisted an ankle or
Yeah.
hurt a knee, and we
Yeah.
finally had to go to the Don't Screw Up camp, and we said, hey guys, you're screwing up a little bit, please don't injure all of our participants.
There you
um,
go. No,
but
the slack line I set up is maybe a couple feet off the ground. It's not. I'm not that daredevilish.
good, because neither am I. I'm sitting on a firm chair right now. So speaking of which, so there's a couple of interesting things. One is you're a barefoot aficionado,
Yes,
but I also want to talk to you about like ergonomics in
for
work,
sure.
because this is a business audience that's going to be watching this. And one of the things is that you just mentioned things about like stacking your body, right? And
Mhm.
I'm sitting here thinking, oh, I'm sure that I do that. And then I pay attention to you talking, and I'm like, wow, I'm actually pushing my chest forward a little bit. I'm putting pressure on my lower back. I'm sitting in a chair, like okay, clearly I don't know what the hell I'm doing with my body. Um, Tell me, what should I, how can we treat our bodies well as people who have desk jobs?
Yeah, so I have a very interesting take, and I think the important part to first like clear out of the way is that like a working environment is meant to be dynamic. So ideally, I always tell people like your best position is your next position, and we don't want to be sitting on our butt for too long without getting up. And but that's the obvious thing. Now, before I tell you what I advocate in terms of sitting, I just want to do an experiment with you. And I'm just going to ask you to take your hands and squeeze them together as hard as you can for like 5, 10 seconds. You're like squeezing, 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 right? And now I want you to let go, and I want you to see your hands, how they're all white and right, they're kind of tense, right?
Yep.
So if I asked you to squeeze your hands for 12 hours, would you be happy with me?
No, but fortunately for you, my hands would be weak enough that I couldn't come after you because of it.
There you go. Exactly. That's a good answer. So we can relax our hands now. So the idea here is that, like, the idea of squeezing, right? Obviously not comfortable. But what have we been told by mom, dad, and society about sitting?
Oh, sit
Sit
up
up
straight.
straight,
Yep.
shoulders back, and good posture means like to be in this very upright soldier-like position, right?
Yep.
But if you take your hands in your lower back and you squeeze yourself into that position, like being in that amazing posture that we just were recommended by mom, dad, and society, we're going to notice that low back muscles, they engage, they tense up, right? If I really push my chest forward and upwards and stay nice and tall, like I've been told to my whole life, I'm going to feel my low back muscles squeezing, engaging.
I feel them coming down, like
Exactly. So they kind of
compressing
get
down along
compressed.
the length of my body. Yep.
Exactly. So especially in the low back, they're going to feel compressed. Now, if we teleport ourselves over to India for a second, or China, or Africa, we'll see many 85-year-olds that have no problem doing a an ass to grass squat, meaning they're fully capable of sitting down into like a chilled position where like they could go poop or hang out, like a little baby playing in sandcastles, right? The idea of a full squat. Now, most North Americans that are over the age of 20 cannot do a deep squat. And it
I
has
am over
nothing.
the age of 20 and I have tried to do those because I know they're supposed to be better for me in a number of ways. It's literally one of those things that's kind of on my bucket list. So please keep
Yes.
going.
So one of the things here is that if we realize, so if I was in an ass to grass squat, what you would see out of my low back is not quote unquote good posture. You would see that my low back is rounded, right?
Okay.
So one of the things I advocate for when it comes to just chilling and sitting on your like if you're doing your work is to let yourself be slouchy, to let yourself relax and not think that you need to be in the squeezed position all the time, because actually what you're doing when you're squeezing is you're going into those hand squeezing type thing that I showed you at the beginning. So a big sigh, letting your shoulders come forward and letting I tell people, let your nipples chill. Let your sit a little bit on your stomach. And then we're actually mimicking a bit more of the posture that we're in when we're in that ass to grass squat, which is to be rounded and relaxed. Now, I'm not telling people to have their head 16 inches in front of their body with their head poking forward. But what I am saying is just if you soften your body, including your upper back, your mid back, and your lower back, and now placing yourself in a position where your shoulders are just forward and relaxed. There's just no more tension in the body, because that's how a child is going to sit until they're whipped by their parents that they should be, always popping their chest up. And that's what actually creates a lot more tension, is sitting in these squeezed positions.
So I'm doing this while you're talking, right? Obviously, because I'm that kind of guy. Um, and I'm noticing something. So right, this would be my up, and in fact, during a webcam, because I want to have a nice smooth T-shirt, right? I often even exaggerate the way that I
Hmm.
pull my shoulders back, and
Yeah.
and stuff like that. Um, so when you said that, I'm like, okay, I'm when I if I release all of that, I do feel like, oh, okay, there is a place here where my back is being supported by the chair, so I'm not like but I'm kind of in a place that feels relaxed and comfortable, but I also feel like if I went too far, now I would be hurting something or stretching. So it's like
That's
there's a
fair, exactly. So again, if I showed a side profile that's like, I'm not telling you to be here. I'm just saying to just kind of sigh and just feel a sense of softness where like you're just permitting a bit more relaxation rather than, like you said, popping those shoulders back and like kind of showing like the cleanliness of your shirts and the open wrinkle or no wrinkles, we'll say, in the shirt.
right.
So 100% it's about like, and again, like, if I'm leaning in to listen, it would be normal but I'm kind of leaning in from my pelvis. It's not just my head that's going to lean in, but I'm just going to like lean in, and the weight's going to be more on the tops of my hamstring muscles. But sometimes I could be back here and chilling. So there's this element of dynamicness that like, it's not about like one position, but it's also giving yourself the permission to relax. That so many people, like, you just kind of see them like sitting and they look so uncomfortable, but because they think that posture means active. Like, look, so I have a quote with Conor McGregor in the background, right? And people love him or hate him, but it says an injury is not just a process of recovery, it's a process of discovery. Now, the point to make more so about, there we go, here we, recovery.
Hey, Conor McGregor.
The thing about here, when it comes down to the idea of a boxer, okay, is a boxer fighting like this, or are they kind of chilled out? And so the idea is that we're thinking it also comes down to this environment of the gym. So you might have a lot of business audience here that are the weekend warrior type. So they've been sitting all day, and now that they need to go and grind out some back exercise to kind of counter. That's what a lot of people might think. But if you just look at the way that most athletes are, they have more relaxed rib cage. They're not constantly squeezing back. In fact, they promote like rotation of the body and allowing their shoulder blades to move on their rib cage instead of being squeezed back. Like, here, imagine I'm going to try to punch you, but I'm going to keep my shoulder back. That doesn't actually make sense. If I say nice to meet you, what's going to happen is the shoulder blades are going to move outside and along the rib cage so that my arms can extend forward. But if I program myself to compress everything back there and create squeezing, Well, now I'm going to get all those knots that people experience has to do with the fact that they've just been squeezing all day and they actually need to learn to get their shoulder blades to elongate around the rib cage in order to create more space back there.
Wow. Okay. So rule number one is don't be afraid of slouching to a point
Yes. Yes.
in your
So
chair.
a big long, like find the back of your butt, give a long sigh, let your shoulders come, and just that's like a new position for people to be in.
Yeah. Boy. Yes. Okay. Back to live stream. See, now I'm suddenly getting into my body and becoming aware of my body, going, oh, that's interesting. It's definitely not how I sit.
Yeah, no, no,
I usually
and it's
sit.
most people want to be like, but it's
Yep.
just like just chilling out your stomach because and like because a lot of people either want to suck in or whatever it might be. It just a sigh and exhale. So when we're stressed, we're very much used to breathing quite quickly. So if I keep breathing more and more in, basically imagine my body like a balloon. It's going to hyperinflate. It's going to get like almost thrown forward by there's almost being too much air. So imagine I'm holding a big stability ball in front of me and I try to bend down. So a lot of times when people think they have tight hamstrings, what happens is their rib cage is just overinflated with air. By learning to exhale, that's when the body could start to come down, and then I could actually have better mobility to go and touch my toes. So like a great exercise for a business person listening right now is to just sigh, completely let their head relax, and go down to touch the floor and just chill with their rounded back. We often demonize this idea that our back should ever be round because we've heard back straight all the time. And so those muscles just want to relax and chill. And a lot of nice things happen to so many of my clients that have been experiencing chronic back pain by just getting them to like just go down to touch the floor with their head relaxed and breathing quietly in these positions to create a
And
lot of
that's
new
do that
movement.
in a chair or do that from a standing position.
Yeah, first start with a chair usually actually, because when people think they go to a yoga class or whatever, they need to touch their toes with their legs locked out. I actually don't like that. I like to have soft knees and be more forward so that I can actually touch the floor. Because if my knees are locked and I try to stand back up, I actually don't have legs to push off, so I end up lifting through my lower back. So we've all heard the expression bend your knees to pick something up. The problem is that when people actually go down to bend their knees, when they stand back up, their knees start to prematurely extend backwards, and then they finish with their lower back. So if I could keep
Mhm.
my knee forward throughout standing up, then the load stays in my foot, my calf, my hamstring, my quad. That's kind of this ground up approach that most people, when they're experiencing back pain, it's not because their backs are weak. It's because their backs are constantly engaged and they don't trust the lower limb to take on the load. So it's all about matter of like force redistribution. If I could get the whole leg to take on more load, then the back could chill out as a result. So that comes with the idea that like if I bend down, if you think about a strongman competition for a sec, those guys that lift these crazy heavy stones.
Yes.
So when they're lifting those stones, but their backs are rounded, right? Because they naturally have to pick up the stone. So
Yep.
inherently, it's not the back rounded that's the problem. It's the fact that if their knees straightened out when they had all that load, then they're screwed because it's way too much load for their back. So
Right.
they keep their knees bent and then they pick it up and their knees stay bent as they bring their hips forward and pick up the weight. And that's how they're able to lift such heavy weight. So it's not about demonizing back straight versus back rounded. It's more about just learning to load the legs. That's the most important part of this. And so part of the process is actually just learning and sitting to just chill yourself out a bit more and learn to disengage the back and not engage it all the time.
So, in those rare occasions when I actually do get out of my chair, and I assure you it happens at least once every other day, um, what any ideas for how I number one, what should I be doing, and talk to me about barefoot because that was one of the things that was most intriguing. Is you talk a lot about barefoot, and I actually have these shoes called Zero
Yeah.
XERO
Yeah.
shoes, which are kind of like barefoot. And a friend of mine started the company, so when I found out about like okay, fine, I have to buy these silly shoes because my friend started the company, blah, blah, blah. And I bought a pair and I wore it and I'm like, oh, these are weird. I feel like I'm barefoot. And then I was kind of like, actually, this isn't so bad. But
Yeah.
there was, talk to me about barefoot.
Yeah, for sure. So, I encourage all my clients to either go barefoot or mimic barefoot-like conditions, like you said. So I actually have a pair of Zeros right here. I love them.
Cool.
So
This was
it's
not
cool. They're,
pre-planned.
they're a super fast-growing company in the States. So it's pretty awesome that you know the CEO. But yeah, the whole concept is let's think back in time. It's very simple. 100,000 years ago, our ancestors were not wearing Asics, New Balance, Nikes, Brooks, Hoka's, you name your fancy footwear company that we've been told is like what we need. Because the problem when we look at most shoes today is that there's a few features that are deleterious for our body. Number one, we could both agree that if we were wearing a high-heeled shoe, so think about a triangle, our feet are like monkeys. They're meant to be spread out of the tips of the toes. If you look at a baby, they have cute little toes that are nice and spread. But if you look at a high-heeled shoe, obviously that's not the shape of a natural foot.
Right.
Now, even classic running shoes are also not the shape of the natural foot, even if you buy the wide pair. Because when you go to a footwear store, where do they measure the width of the foot? Is at the ball of the foot, not at the tips of the toes. But the tips of the toes is where our foot is meant to be the widest. So if we look at a shoe like this, you'll just notice that the foot, it's a foot shape rather than a shoe shape. So it's very simple that, bunions, mortar neuromas, all these foot issues that people are dealing with, it's not a foot problem. It's a shoe problem. Compound years and years of wearing something that constricts your toes to be squished together, well, your feet now start to get squished together. So that's one element.
So, by the way, just as an ad hoc reinforcement to that, I just realized my entire life I have gotten calluses on the edge of my big toe, and I think on the part opposite the foot, the little part that protrudes by my pinky toe.
Yeah.
And in COVID, I started walking around just in socks and in zero shoes, and I have not gotten those for the
Yeah,
last several years.
exactly. Well, ideally we push through our toes, but because the big toe gets deviated to the midline because of the fact that the shoe is just compressing it, so now you start to roll off the edge of your foot instead of being able to push through the toe, which is very, very important. Our big toe joint is actually extremely important, but that's an aside. Well, not an aside note. It's just so important. And when basically imagine wearing mittens versus gloves. So in warm weather environments, wherever your audience is, so we'll talk about 5-finger gloves versus mittens that keep your fingers together. Well, would you be able to text and type if your hands were like this all day? Obviously not. And so the next element is like you'd start almost like using your hands all weirdly. And that's kind of what happens to our feet is we start using our feet weirdly if they're not spread out. Now, talking about gloves, imagine I was like always in rubber gloves. Like my sensitivity, my nerve endings would start to get off because like I don't expose the skin of my foot or the skin of my hand to the textures that I'd be playing around with. Now, we live in a world of hardwood floor, concrete, and cement where there's no texture. And then on top of it, we add massive cushiony footwear like 3-inch Hoka's or whatever you've been told are good for you. It feels like I'm walking on a cloud, right? Now, if I put a blindfold on your eyes, would you be able to see? Obviously
No.
not. Well, if I put a lot of cushioning between you and the ground, are you able to feel? Are you able to sense the textures and the pebbles beneath your feet? Well, not really. And so what happens is our feet become a little dumb because they're not receiving the optimal information from the ground. And so now we start to have errors. Or just imagine standing on a pillow versus standing on the ground. Like the pillow is unstable. And so when we're walking with so much cushioning between us and the ground, it's like we're blindfolding our feet. And now like our brain doesn't even know we have feet that exist. And now think about the old people that are given like, the orthopedic grandpa shoes that are super thick. Well, we're deep stabilizing them even further. And so one of the cool things about these types of shoes is they're a lot thinner. And so you could perceive the ground a lot better. So that's a huge point of our feet is they're not only a mechanical structure, but they're a sensor. Okay, makes sense so
That
far?
makes total sense. Yeah.
So basically, we have a narrow toe box in traditional shoes versus a wide toe box, and we have a thin surface here. Just to kind of point out here, one thing that I do, so I have like a transition shoe that I often recommend to people. I'll talk about the name of the company is called Ultra, Altra. It's out of Utah. So they have the wide toe box they also have the other features, which I'll talk about in a sec, but they're a nice transition shoe because a lot of people go from like a maximalist shoe, meaning like so much cushioning like a Hoka. They could not tolerate going into something like this that rapidly. Like you have to almost like transition because the feet become weak as a result of just not utilizing them, which comes to my like another point about arch support and orthotics. We probably a lot of people have been told I need arch support, right? But if we look at a foot, so I got a foot model over here, what we'll notice is that, oh, I'm in the wrong area. Here we go. What happens to the foot as the knee comes forward?
It flattens out.
It flattens out. Now, what we've heard about flat feet, that they're
Bad.
horrible, they're bad. But what happens if flat feet are learning to flatten out your foot is the solution to all your problems? Like
Well, I'm
literally,
never do it because I've been taught that flat feet are bad.
yes, but when the cool thing here is, okay, look at the shoe. There's zero arch support because it permits your foot to do its thing. If we both put a cast on our arm, okay, so I have a cast for the last 6 weeks. I just broke my arm. What's going to happen to my arm?
What's going to atrophy?
After
Yeah,
it's going to atrophy and it's going to be pretty freaking stiff, right? So when we put a cast like an Asics or a New Balance or a shoe that literally has no splay, no movement, well, what happens to the 26 bones that nature designed to move and splay and coordinate
sure.
absorption, right? Foot flattening basically equals trampoline absorption to propulsion, right? The idea is that our feet are meant to flatten, but if we put orthotics and arch support, we are basically blocking that natural movement from taking place. And so now, as a result, our knees have to take on more load, our back has to take on more load. So we're dishonoring the way the body functions when we use arch support or insoles.
Got it. Okay, so what are my action implications here
Sorry, yeah,
as a professional?
well, in terms, so the cool thing here is that there's actually a lot of new companies that exist that make dress shoes that have this type of flexibility built in, and they have like a faux heel. So the last element I haven't mentioned yet is just the idea of a higher heel than a toe. So obviously a high heeled shoe, like that woman or man, whatever floats your boat, decides to wear. Um, let's say I'm wearing 3 inches. Well, why do women like to wear high heels? Because it accentuates features, right? It
Yep.
pops the breast, pops the bum. But what is happening in the low back? It's
Right. It,
exaggerated.
it it pops those by creating an S shape in your back. I mean, it's
Exactly. Now, obviously, to a lesser extent, but an Asics that has a half-inch heel is still basically pushing your body forward. In order for you to not fall over, you basically need to extend your back in order to maintain some sort of semblance of compensation against what happens at the ground. So a very important element of all these shoes is they're flat. They're flat over here. Again, in Canada, we need winter boots. So I have all sorts of different, like every company now is making dress shoes, more casual shoes, whatever it may be. Like I wore to my own wedding, a company called Carrots, CARETS.com. And they're an amazing brand for people that are professionals that want to look good. But basically what happens is they've made the toe box to look like a traditional shoe that looks pointy, but they made it a little longer so your feet land at the widest part and your toes are not getting squished together. And they have a faux heel, like a fake heel. So it looks like it's a classic shoe, but you're actually flat to the ground. So
so what you're telling me is that we are designing footwear now to look unhealthy, and we have to
yes.
hide the fact that we're really doing something that's good for our bodies.
Yes, essentially. Well, I mean, look, like I personally have zero problem wearing these shoes, and I've kind of decided over time that given how much pain I experienced for so long in my life, I am not going to compromise my health for like looking good because I don't care because I care more about how I feel than anything else.
Right.
And having experienced all that pain and now feeling the way I do, like what I'll tell the audience here is like the dose makes the poison. So like if you're going out for a walk in the neighborhood or in a park, whatever, wear the shoes that are good for your feet. If you're going out for dinner, like and you're sitting down, doesn't matter that much. Probably not. But like your body can handle it, and probably everyone's body is handling it. But there's a silent pandemic or epidemic of unhealthy feet that are not realizing it. So people are looking towards their backs as the issues or their knees as the issue, but in reality, it has a lot more to do with the fact that their feet are not supporting their body, and they have to now rely on these shoes. So a lot of people basically like live in their shoes, even in their house, and to me, that's a big problem.
Okay, so now we're coming to the thing that is most critical for me, which we talked about before I hit. Whoops, sorry about that. Hmm. Will this?
Okay.
You didn't see that. Okay. Now we're coming to the part. I don't even know how that happened. I mean, clearly there's a way to
I think
switch
you
cameras.
clicked on
I don't know
something.
what it is.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, Now we come to the part about me. So I have just incredible trouble sitting still. I am always like getting cross-legged in a chair, and then that gets uncomfortable after a couple of minutes, and then I sit up, then I sit up straight, and that gets uncomfortable. Then I put my feet on the floor, and I'm constantly shifting, which, by the way, is a big problem when doing video, because if I'm sitting, if I'm doing something more cross-legged, now suddenly I'm like this, and I have to change my camera, but then I go like this. Big hassle. How can we relate to our bodies when we're sitting? So here I am, and my keyboard is at a certain height, and I understand, if I had a special table made or an adjustable height desk, I could fix it, but I don't. And so, how do I relate to my body while I am here at my stupid desk job, doing the hunch over thing, the hunch over too far thing, etc.?
Hmm, hmm.
How can I keep
Yeah,
myself?
I mean, certainly organizing yourself in a way where like you do ideally work on a screen with like that's a that has your hands low, and so that you're not either typing up here or whatever. It just reminds me though, because you're talking about it being restless, and a lot of times like I'm no medical doctor, but I'm very well versed in the field of nutrition, and a lot of people are deficient in magnesium, and we could think of calcium as something that helps muscles contract, and magnesium is something that helps people relax, like things relax. That's why the idea of Epsom salt baths, if you've heard of that, like people, you know, a lot of people do lack magnesium because the soils today are over farmed, and so you don't like derive the same types of minerals, and the mineral magnesium helps people's bodies feel more relaxed. So that could be part of your story here.
I'm going to write that down while you keep talking.
Yeah, that like again, magnesium bisglycinate. There's tons of different types of variations, but like I definitely like do search on that because a lot of people are deficient in magnesium, and adding that in, like a lot of people get muscle cramps at nighttime, their calves cramp up. I don't know if that's your story or not, but um, that would be something. Oh, that's like a severe form of like a lack of electrolytes in the body. Um, Part of it is, we talked again at the very start of the conversation. Your best position is your next position. Take more meetings, have it in a call so you could fidget around and move. Like look at children. Like, I actually back in the day when I was in elementary school I got special permission to stand in the back of the class because I was you. I just needed to be moving. And like I think that's part of our inherent biology is to be movers. And we can't deny that. Like as much as like, yes, I do have a desk job and like oh, I do not, fortunately. But if you do have a desk job, like you're going to be operating in the confines of that environment. So whenever you can, like to be changing positions, the adjustable height desk would be a cool thing. Allowing yourself to sit more relaxed, taking meetings on the move. Um, you know, those are the types of recommendations. I actually, if you are working from home, I'm a big advocate for people getting almost like a slant board, like where they'd almost be in a squatting position. We talked about, okay, how do I get in a squat? Well, the first place to start is actually to use like a heel elevation. So using like a calf ramp that people use to stretch out their calves, but standing on it in the reverse way, or even just sitting on the floor while they work a bit. So like sit on the floor, then stand up and change positions. Again, I know under the confines of a environment where you're at work, maybe you can't do that, but like I'm all for you putting your foot one way, then you're putting your foot the other way, and just changing positions because it's not natural to be that robot that's trying to hold this position. No one feels comfortable staying in one position. There's a reason your body moves. It's because it goes, hey, that gets a little uncomfortable. Let me change positions. So you'll actually see that if I had a room full of like 100 children and they were all sitting on the floor, you'd see all of them naturally like fidgeting and moving around, and none of them would be in the exact same seated position, because the floor is actually like this natural like reminder, hey, move, change positions. So
So what you're
floor
telling me is
is
that my
very
body is
important.
healthier than I think even like
Yeah, I
I'm
wouldn't like interpret that as a bad thing, like it is like it is normal for us to move.
cool. So we're pretty much out of time. Uh, what final things do you have to say for folks? How can they get a hold of you if they only take away one thing from our conversation? What
Yeah,
should they
I'd say
take away?
like, if you're at home or even if you're in your cubicle, like kick off your shoes. No one cares. Like what do you do when you go into an airplane? For the most part, most people just knock off their shoes because like, my feet could breathe, right? So if we inherently know I don't want to be have my feet squished together for an 8-hour flight if you're flying to Europe or whatever, you know, free your feet. Look at these different brands: Ultra, Zeros, Vivo Barefoot. There's this girl named Anya reviews, and she has a list of like all the different brands that exist. So you can look and explore these different options that are available. They'll be different, and I can guarantee you that your feet will thank you. And all of a sudden, like there's a period of adjustment, and that's where I can come in, because what I find is the solution itself, often if someone's experiencing foot pain, is part of it is to switch shoes, and part of it is to learn the stacking that I was coaching and talking about at the very beginning. So I don't like, oftentimes people like switch into these shoes and they like they'll be fine with the transition over time, but I could facilitate that transition by teaching what I teach. So essentially, if people want to get in contact, I'm in Montreal, but I do offer virtual services. But I've also packaged together like a very affordable online program that people could do in the comfort of their own home, which teaches the exact same system that I use with my one-on-one clients. So learning to stack, learning to pressurize the right areas, learning to move your body in 3D, learning to keep that knee forward, all the things we've talked about today, learning to slouch and relax. And it's the same system that I use with my one-on-one clients that gets, fantastic results. I've put that together into a program that people could access. And if you just want to check me out on Instagram or Facebook or LinkedIn, it's Ground-Up Physio. So the word ground up and then physio is PHYSIO.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for joining us. And I'm sitting here being aware of my knees now and my feet. And next time I am in Montreal, I will look forward to finding you in person and
Amen.
saying
Sounds
hello.
great.
Then thank you, everyone who's watching.